Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Welcome to reInvent. Hope that the week is great for you guys. Hope that it's already starting off kind of action-packed. Speaking of action-packed, I think we got a really great panel for you today. We're going to dig deep into finding tech talent and focusing in on that next generation, whether that next generation are people who are going to be reskilled or that future techie. We're going to have about 10 minutes at the end for questions, so please prepare your questions and ask hardballs to this illustrious panel. So, where this comes from is AWS, as a number of you have heard, was the fastest company from a cloud computing perspective and from a IT vendor perspective to get to a $10 billion yearly run rate. Happened a few years ago, and the company is still growing in the mid 40%, with well in the $24-26 billion in yearly annual revenue. This is creating this gigantic job opportunity. Cloud and distributed computing have been the #1 LinkedIn skill for the past 3 years in a row. Yet, at the same time, Glassdoor ran a study, I think it was about 2015, where they saw companies on their platform between 2009 and 2015, the time to hire actually increased by 80%. Some of it is because we're really screening people for false negatives, but in truth, we're just not preparing people for this workforce at the pace that we need to be. I think some of the things that our panelists have done are really exciting at creating some changes to it. They're going to introduce some of that need case, why do we need to go deep into providing that tech talent, go into a discussion about some of the things that are already going on and what are the things that we need to look for coming forward. So quick drop on my panelists. Starting with Scott Rawls. Scott's the 5th president of Northern Virginia Community College, or NOVA. He is the largest public college or university in the Mid-Atlantic, and it graduates the most IT students, more than any other community college at 90,000. Scott's also a good friend. We've been able to collaborate in depth over the past year as he's announced some really exciting things at NOVA. In May of 2016, he was named President Emeritus of the North Carolina Community College System after a previous 20 years with roles as a state system president, vice president of economic and workforce development, and president of Craven Community College. In 2017, Scott was named one of Washington, D.C. region's Power 100 leaders by the Washington Business Journal, and I can guarantee you that that was a well-deserved association. 4 times in recent years, he's testified to the U.S. Senate and House subcommittees on workforce development, so he's very well tied between that education and workforce path, and he currently serves as co-chair for the Policy Leadership Trust for Student Success. Mariam Adil is an education specialist at the World Bank, where she has supported more than 25 educational projects across Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. I've gotten to know her recently because we've been doing some stuff with her in regards to the projects that she is leading called the Skills for the Future initiative. She has a real deep focus on results-based financing, public-private partnerships, and from a World Bank perspective, it's really amazing to see this new industry to education collaboration. She's also the founder of the social venture Grid, our gaming revolution for inspiring development. And she's mainstreaming mobile games as a medium for behavior change. She's also working towards creating context-vigilant games. I had to get a definition of what that was. I think you'll have to figure it out later. She has presented Grid at multiple high-level forums, including 2 sessions moderated by President Clinton at the CGI university meetings, at the World Bank OLC launch with President Jim Kin, and 2 TEDx events. She's also the recipient of the CGIU Honor Roll Alum Award and 2018 Adam Start Entrepreneurship Award, 2015 Andrew E. Rice Award, and so on. Just a fantastic background and does some amazing things around Middle East and Northern Africa for us. Ian Wilson, just to my left, joined AWS as our HR leader, our HR VP back in April it was, correct? And he's already introducing amazing initiatives within the company. In this role, he partners with AWS leaders to ensure we have culture, talent, and organizational capability to deliver on our ambitions. Prior, he was the HR leader for Microsoft, Windows and Device Group, and previously with Microsoft, he was the HR leader for hardware engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain. He also was the director of talent and organization capability for their interactive entertainment business and Xbox. Previously, he was based in Beijing, China, as the director of people and organizational capability, so he brings a multicultural aspect. He holds his bachelor degree from Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations, which I have a fondness of. He currently serves on the board of directors for Kindering, a not-for-profit for early childhood development in Washington, and recently joined the board of Special Olympics for Washington. All right, to the meat of the session, I wanted to turn to Ian first, and this is going to be, again, kind of where is this need coming from? When you look at AWS's hiring needs, what are the primary hard skills and also some of those soft skills that we recruit for today? And you see us over the next 5 years?
Yep, fantastic question. And thanks everyone for your interest in this very important topic. As Ken alluded to, AWS is growing and has grown. I think our customer obsession is just leading us on this path to innovate more and more and more. Hopefully you'll hear a lot about that this week. And all of that innovation, all the investments in our infrastructure, of course, have pretty significant demands for talent. Already in AWS, we have tens of thousands of employees, and we're going to continue to acquire talent at a pretty healthy rate. One of the things you mentioned in terms of my job, it has a lot to do with the culture of the organization. And at Amazon broadly, and certainly in AWS, a lot of our talent needs do start with how we think about our culture. In Amazon, we have something called our leadership principles. And to your question about specifically, really where do we feel some of the gaps or challenges when we're looking to acquire talent? From a leadership principle perspective, we often see it in a couple of pretty interesting places that I think would be interesting to discuss. One of our leadership principles is think big. And often we see people who have some of the technical skills, but they don't have that ability to dream and to think big. And for something like AWS, or I think for anyone who's working in the cloud at all, I think that ability to think big is so incredibly important. One of the other ones that we really focus a lot on, and in some cases it defines whether or not we'll take a bet on talent or take a risk on talent, is something we call learn and be curious. And the reason why learn and be curious is just so important these days is because AWS is moving fast, the industry is moving fast, all of you know technology is moving fast, and so many of the skills that we have today, particularly from a technical perspective, are coming obsolete pretty quickly. And so one of the things we really look for are, can people learn? Can they continue to develop and acquire new skills rapidly as technology continues to advance at a pretty fast pace?
How about on the hard skills perspective, in terms of like the technical roles that we're recruiting for? Where do you see the most demand happening?
Certainly, AI and ML right now is pretty hot. I think there's a lot of people who are investing in it. We're at, I think, a pretty interesting time with those technologies specifically, where the excitement and the demand is so big and the talent is pretty scarce because it's new. And I think more and more different learning institutions are going to invest over time in machine learning and artificial intelligence curriculum to help work with that gap. And so sometimes we find ourselves trying to think about people who have good computer science foundational skills, but maybe not those specialized skills, where we're making bets and offering people the opportunity to learn some of those after they join the team.
Great. From a machine learning perspective, do you see it just being the PhDs that have been recruited have been recruited for those positions for years, or is there going to be a leveling, or what are your thoughts?
I think we see it across the board. I mean, certainly we see it at that highest level, some of the deepest thinkers in the space who are frankly doing some applied research as much as actually developing services. But certainly we're doing a lot of campus hiring with the students with those types of skills. But also what we're finding with some of those newer technologies is it's just as important for some of our solution architects, some of our sales leaders to have competency in those areas. Because again, for us, it's not just about creating interesting technologies, it's actually empowering our customers with those technologies.
Yeah.
So sometimes those customer-facing roles are the places where we find talent to be in the most demand for some of these newer technology areas.
Great. And how about the way we look at it from, or at least in your role, how do you look at that from the role of recruiting for Amazon versus the role that we play as as helping develop talent for Amazon AWS customers and partners?
And it's one of the things that we're starting to put a lot of thought into, because as I talk with customers and we get different points of feedback, what we're understanding is as we're creating new technologies, and again, I don't think we're going to slow down our rate of innovation, our customers are also feeling the need to either revamp their workforce with new talent or to upgrade the skills of their current workforce. And so it's something that we're thinking a lot about today as we talk to our customers about ways that we might be able to help them with that in some pretty meaningful ways.
Okay, great. And before I move on to, did you want to?
No, it's a scratch.
Before I move on to Scott, talk about inclusion and diversity. Obviously it's a hot button topic now. What are your thoughts? How does AWS look at this?
It certainly starts with the basic idea of the scarcity of talent. And I think I certainly every day look at it from an Amazon or AWS perspective, but then when I talk to and see what our customers are looking at, and then I think even broadly across the industry, I think the reality is that the demand for technical talent is just far going to outsee the supply as we think about it today. So in some respects, there's an element of culture that it makes sense from a diversity and inclusion perspective, but from a talent perspective, if we don't find real meaningful ways to engage a broader population of society in these technical career opportunities, we're just not going to have the talent that all of us collectively need to continue to advance for our own customers.
Right. So going, Scott, could you share any data about the need for tech talent, about the need for the cloud inside Northern Virginia, including some of those skills that are in the highest demand?
Sure. Well, and that's where we started as a community college and as one of the largest colleges in the Mid-Atlantic. We partnered in 2016 with a group called Northern Virginia Technology Council, which is the largest tech council in the country. And we went out to all the tech employers in the DC region and asked them where are their greatest problems, where are their greatest challenges. Interestingly, I'll just point this out, that they came back, the greatest skill demand that they were having problems with was not a tech skill. It was communications, primarily written communications. Mm-hmm. But that being said, they identified 5 kind of broad competency areas, and cloud infrastructure was number 4, behind programming, software development, cybersecurity, data science, and then cloud. So 40% of the tech employers in our region said that was a big difficulty. And then when you dug down into it deeper, looking at the tasks that they were saying when they said cloud infrastructure, 5 of those top 10 job tasks specifically spoke to AWS infrastructure. So we were kind of primed that was a place we needed to be, and then we kind of got involved with AWS, which was very fortuitous for us. Now, 2 years later, you kind of look at the data, and that's one of the things our college does. We have a unit just focused on workforce analytics, which is kind of unique for us. So we pay close attention to this. So if you look at data in terms of job postings, for this year to date, there have been 98,000 job postings in cloud computing, cloud infrastructure across the U.S. That's a 34% increase over just last year. Wow. And that's 8 times more than 2010. So that's a huge number. And kind of use that in context. In 2015, across the U.S., we graduated 68,000 students with bachelor's degrees in computer and information science. We now have advertised 30,000 more job postings just in cloud for the year. So that's where you see that gap come in.
Has that paralleled any other any other area of concentration that you've been in?
Certainly for us,
cybersecurity.
cybersecurity. So, that's sort of what we're looking at in the context of we just, with AWS partnerships, started the cloud degree. Interestingly, our first year numbers were the same for cyber and cloud. We have 46 students enrolled in a first semester this year. So when we started cybersecurity, just a little over 4 years ago, we had just 45, 46 students. Today we have 1,500 students. Yeah. So as long as that job demand is there, and as long as our students see that way of breaking into that area, it's going to mushroom, and we're trying to prepare for that.
Scott's had this amazing leadership within the Northern Virginia community region for a while. I know there's some people who are here from California, and we actually partnered with Santa Monica College a few years back, and they built a curriculum, a cloud computing certificate, and they went last year, I think it was somewhere around 70, 80 people that registered for those courses there last year, and that mushroomed to 325 within a year, in addition to all these other colleges. So we've seen that demand grow. What role do you see Northern Virginia Community College playing in filling those roles? And is it all about? Is it about the extension, the matriculation to 4 years? Is it about growth directly into industry jobs?
Well, it's both. And, and for instance, with our partnership with George Mason, we work to make sure that our students could then move forward and complete a 4-year degree so they can have career progression in that regard. But I think the biggest role for an institution like ours, which is an open access institution, and by that I mean we serve the top 100%. We're not a selective institution in that regard. But in that sense, what we can do is what I think Ian was talking about, is diversification. And I think that's the greatest challenge to getting to those numbers. I just throw out a few other statistics, but in most recent year, if you look at the computing information science graduates, only 19% were female. You're never going to get to these numbers unless unless that number moves. You've seen a decline over the past 10 years in the percentage of Latino and African American females graduating computer science programs. We have to look to how we broaden and reach populations, and particularly getting into lower income populations, which turn to colleges like ours with the decline of state funding for higher ed.
Great. Maryam, you're going to take a whole different perspective with the work that you do, being in hard-hit regions in the Middle East and Northern Africa and dealing with refugee populations. I hate to put you on the spot, but make the case for why tech companies need to be playing a role in your region and preparing the people that you serve for that future workforce.
Wow, okay. Yeah, so Ken, I think when we talk about Middle East and Northern Africa, we're talking about 22 countries, right? And this is all the way from your wealthier Gulf countries, the Saudi and Bahrain, and the Qatar and UAE, all the way down to your lower middle income and lower middle income countries, and some very small countries like Djibouti and Egypt, and some bigger ones, Egypt and Jordan. And the spectrum is just huge, and in the region, it's one of those regions that has the largest population of youth, right? And 28.6% of that youth is unemployed. So this really the skills shortage really becomes the core of economic, political, social, everything stability. Like if that's what's driving unemployment, all of a sudden becomes everyone's problem. And that's why it's also a policymaker's problem. So one of the things that we've been looking at, the World Bank has a WDR, a World Development Report, each year. The last year's report was on education. This year's report was on the changing nature of work, right? So there's a very strong realization that the future of work, with the demands, the skill requirements for the future of work, the current education systems can just not keep pace with it. From what we're hearing, it's such an innovative thing to do in the States, but just imagine, in the countries that we're working with, it's definitely a huge skills gap, and that's something that we're trying to target. And again, this particularly in MENA, given the instability, given the fact that it has the largest refugee population right now, For us, it's becoming, like when we think about refugees, you imagine it as the biggest challenge, but actually we're seeing our digital skills as a huge opportunity, because the refugees don't have access to the brick and mortar infrastructure that you mostly have where in the education systems. Here all you have is a youth who has his phone, who's connected to the internet, but is living in a refugee camp. And how do you reach that population, both in terms of education opportunities, but also employment opportunities? Because it doesn't matter where they're sitting, as long as they have the skills to contribute. And we believe that cloud computing is just that a bit of a magic key that way. So we're thinking big, and we're really trying to move in that direction. So for us, yes, it's economic, it's political, and it's social.
You also, I remember you threw me some stats around the growth in cloud traffic.
Yes, I have those numbers. It's like, actually, these were numbers that really surprised us. The MENA region is expected to grow 8-fold in terms of cloud traffic, all the way from 31 exabyte in 2013 to 262 exabyte in 2018. And the public cloud services market is going to be 1.2 billion in 2018. So the region is hungry. I mean, it's moving towards the cloud without knowing that it needs the cloud. It needs to build skills for it. So that linkage is what we're trying to look towards.
I think this also speaks to the opportunity to do leapfrog play things there. If the infrastructure may not be there, and yet you have a chance to grow on top of that.
Exactly.
Scott, we met again, I think it was early 2018 or late 2017, and you, I think, declared that you were going to launch the Cloud Associate degree in May of 2018. I will tell you, and I told people internally, that absolutely blew me away. Because we're so used to education moving at a slow pace, and you got them to go fast. How did you do that? And then also, talk about why this collaboration with AWS on this stuff.
Well, as I said, in 2016, we kind of did the data, and so we were primed for that opportunity. So when that was presented to us, and we did a couple of things in that year. One, we started the first East Coast AWS apprenticeship program, which was a big effort, and then the degree. And in both cases, when AWS said,
could you give them a little background on the apprenticeship?
Okay, yeah, the apprenticeship kind of came a little earlier. We were reached out to in terms of starting a tech apprenticeship with veterans. It was a difficult area because it was looking at getting veterans that already had IT, computer science, 4-year degrees, and I think it was A+ certification. Right. So it was a little bit like finding unicorns. But we just had our first graduation last week, but there's 150 in the pipeline. We see that growing to 300. Now it's creating a regional tech apprenticeship program. And AWS said, can you do this? Just like you said, could you do a degree? And we said, heck yeah. Now, we had no idea what that meant. We just said, that's our opportunity, that's our door, let's run through it. I think the biggest, thinking about the Amazon leadership principles, we were talking earlier, Ken actually watches movies and then relates them to the Amazon leadership principles. I didn't know that, but
super geek.
But I think the biggest difference I see from my industry and what you're doing is, one of those leadership principles is a bias for action. I think too often in academia we have a bias for inertia, and inertia is okay if you've got brand, if you've got, if you've got a selectivity, like a 6% selectivity, and people don't worry about that as much. A place like Nova is the 14th largest college in the United States right now, and I bet nobody in this room's ever heard of Nova until you walked into this. So our students don't go out there, saying, I graduated from Nova. What they have to go out there and be able to do is to show what they can do. They have to be able to demonstrate it, and that's why I think an institution like ours has to have even more a bias for action than if you had brand and we're 200 years old and a selectivity of less than 10%.
How do you push, as a leader, how do you push the institution is it easy? I'm the boss. I come in. And,
It is- no,
I mandate.
Academia doesn't work there, and my institution doesn't work that way either. But one of the things that I've always used the phrase data bombs. Every once in a while, you just got to throw a data bomb out there and say, what about this? So if you throw a data bomb out there and say, okay, here's what our region is, the second highest concentration of tech workers in the country. And here's what those jobs are, and cloud is going like this, and Amazon is interested in partnering with us. What would you guys like to do? That's sort of the question. And our college, is a gritty, roll up your sleeves, get it done type college, and that's what we did, I think. And it wasn't just a bias of action from me. It was, I think a collective push in that regard.
Right. And you do have a fantastic team around you, including, I think, in that key workforce development office or personnel within your organization.
Well, one thing we've done, just quickly, I don't mention, is that we're trying to set ourselves up for the future as well. So, trying to be different in that regard. We have 6 very big campuses, all based on geography. So we've created, and each has a provost. We created a 7th provost just to focus on IT and engineering tech, and that's now referred to as our cloud campus, because unlike the provosts that have to worry about parking and all kinds of those kinds of geographical issues, we want that provost just to focus on curriculum, taking it apart, putting it back together, and interacting with our employers. They have to spend as much time on that as someone who had a big geography footprint would have to spend on those kind of campus-type activities.
It's kind of like moving towards that agile production of curriculum. From your vantage point, what's working in higher ed and what isn't to address these needs?
Well, I think if you look at the last 15 years, what's challenging with higher ed, which I think is a problem for the tech community, is becoming increasingly economic segmented. Mm-hmm. So, just use it as an example. If you take the Ivy Pluses, 15% of the students in the Ivy Pluses, being the Ivy Leagues plus like the Dukes, the others of the world, Georgetowns, they have 15% of their students coming from the top 1% of economic families and 13% from the bottom 50%. You're missing a huge talent pool, which, because of the decline in state funding for public education, higher ed in the last 15 years, more of those students are coming to institutions like ours. So there's this huge talent pool of amazing students who are at our institution. I was meeting with one last week. When you were talking, it kind of reminded me of this. Who's a student who, and my question to him was, why are you not at MIT right now? Why are you at Nova? He's a student government leader. He's so far out there on tech. And his answer was, well, my family was homeless when I was in the 12th grade. My grades weren't that good. That's a pretty good reason. But that's the kind of students you're going to find that you're going to miss if you don't pay attention to institutions like ours.
Right. What are your perspectives, by the way, on this? Is higher ed aligned, in general to tech industry needs, or is it moving at the pace that we need it to?
I mean, just very quickly, just touching on that as well, Ken. What Scott is saying is this lost opportunity, and again, the idea of human capital is immensely important, because this digital skills shortage will end up in a loss of productivity, in the labor market. So it is a very economic loss that we're looking at. It is a social and political loss. And I think higher education itself, if we look at the regions where we were, itself is considered elitist, right? That on its own, like the people who make it to higher education, there's still a large population that doesn't even make it that far. So for us, it's also a little bit thinking of what happens a little bit before, it's like, more at the secondary level and even a little bit at the post.
That's where the pipeline starts.
Exactly.
You've got to think in that regard, yeah.
Exactly, and for us, that's becoming a very important conversation to have is, all right, let's make sure that the higher education catches up, but then it doesn't move that fast, and then the pipeline gap becomes really big. So it is really a holistic view that you have to take of the problem.
And we kind of got to do these things at the same time, don't we?
No, that's right. And from our perspective, we look at both these issues. I think, traditionally, higher education served a purpose to transfer scarce knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. Knowledge was scarce. You went to the institutions to get that knowledge. I think now we're in a world where knowledge is ubiquitous, right? And to your point, some of these learning institutions aren't nearly addressing the scope and scale of the talent demand that's going to be out there in the industry. At best, some higher education institutions do a nice job of curating talent pipelines, right? They kind of filter out talent and they say, okay, here's this talent that you need. But for us, we've shifted our strategy significantly. We no longer say, let's just go to the top 10 institutions around the world. We've broadened that funnel significantly, where we go to over 2,000 secondary or higher education learning institutions, number one. But then, as Scott said, we're doing a lot more to tap into what we call non-traditional talent pipelines, such as the military, such as people who are returning to the workforce who need different types of skills. And so as a acquirer and a user of talent, we are shifting radically our overall talent strategies in responses to some of the changes that are happening in secondary education. But also, we are starting to take a much longer term point of view, not only the talent that means for our organization, but for the industry. And we're starting to really understand our willingness to go way further back into the education process. And I have a joke with my team where I say, I don't care if we have to go back to 8th grade. Maybe we have to go back to 3rd grade, right? But we're no longer just sort of saying we are only responsible at this stage of the pipeline. We're really opening ourselves up to look back as far as we might need to.
Speaking of that, I had an interesting conversation a few weeks ago with a really fascinating guy named Charles Isbell, who is, I think, one of the main AI machine learning instructors at Georgia Tech. And he was talking about what they were looking at, and as they're looking at really about this notion of pipeline, in Georgia they're talking about you have to go back and really focus on, and they said sort of their metric that they have to focus on is how many students can they get through intermediate algebra by the 8th grade, because that's what's going to determine, particularly for those computational focused computer science degrees, you've got to hit that mark based on what they've seen to do that. Well, that means you've got to really back up and think differently. Too often when we talk about pipeline, we kind of gild the golden spigot rather than starting back there, and that's where you're really going to have to focus, particularly as we get into machine learning and AI and those types of computational focused areas.
Well, let's reverse it for a sec, because I totally get and understand that notion of that long-term pipeline, and absolutely, if we don't solve that, we're mucking it up for these future generations, and we're teaching them the wrong math and so on. But let's talk about reskilling for a sec, because all of these guys are going to have that on their docket. How do you reskill your workforce? What is the role? Is it should higher education be playing a role? Is it non-traditional institutions, community colleges, online? Are companies looking at the reskilling aspect well?
I think we all certainly have a key part to play. And again, we deal with this with our own team where, again, we're innovating at such a faster rate. Even some of our own employees can't keep up with all of the latest stuff that we're innovating on behalf of customers for. It's quite an interesting thing. And we certainly hear this from our customers as well. So we are right now looking at some pretty disruptive approaches to learning. That go away from this idea of knowledge being static, you acquire it, you have it, to this idea of this is a very dynamic thing. And every day I need to understand what is the most relevant thing for me to know right now, where is that information coming from, how do I get it in a friction-free way as possible, and rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. So we're doing a lot of things at our company to think about some of those things. I think one of the demands we have on our higher education partners is, more than anything, we need talent that knows how to learn and knows how to continuously learn. And so I think it's becoming more and more important through secondary education, through primary education, to teach the ability to learn as opposed to teach knowledge.
Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Ken, one of the things, just like when Ian was talking, it blew my mind when I heard that most online courses only have a 5% completion rate, right? So the motivation of the learner becomes immensely important, because it's not just about having the tool in front of you, it's about being motivated and seeing that reward to learning as a very concrete thing in front of you. A lot of learners understand that, hey, there's these MOOCs, there's all these, you have your edX and you have your Khan Academy and you have your, all your MOOCs, but really, what do I grasp and where is my learning path and where does it take me? I think that clarity is what will drive that motivation, even in terms of reskilling. It's like, I want this promotion. Where does it get me? You know what I'm saying?
On that end, we actually ran a quick trial around that with military veterans to say, okay, if you finish content, this was Pathways on AWS Educate, we would guarantee you a resume review or phone screen. And we found that the persistence of people and their ability to completing increased 10x because you have that carry, a clear antidote. Scott, when you look at a note, what do you look at with your relationship to both George Mason and also to Nova as a direct pipeline for companies like AWS, Booz Allen, Northrop, and so on?
Well, I think what we try to start with is the goals of our students. And one of the things we know is, we're the biggest college in our region of the country, but none of our students as middle schoolers said, someday I'm going to go to Nova. But they come to us to go through us to get to one of two places, and that's to get to the university or to get to an opportunity in an industry like Amazon, or really to both. But that's their goal set. So we don't even measure how many that's not, our primary measure is what we call an economic mobility index. How many of our students within 6 years have either got a bachelor's degree or they have some form of credential for us and are making 2/3 of what is the minimum threshold, or 2/3 of the median for middle class in our region. That's our goal. And if we can achieve that, we're achieving our students' goals. But what that means then, for an institution like ours, is we have to practice extreme partnering. So we try to be extreme partners with our universities, George Mason, George Washington, those types of institutions, and extreme partners with our industries like Amazon, like Northrop Grumman, like Micron, and others that are the major employers in our region.
Great. So reflecting a quick bit on HQ2. So we just now announced it in the Crystal City or National Landing. But it's in your backyard in Long Island City, New York. We assume that this is going to create a massive influx of new jobs for Amazon in the region. What are some of the think big ideas that we should be doing in the Metro DC area?
Well, I think it'll be, I think we have to think in the context of a phrase we use in Northern Virginia is our tech talent pipeline. And I really think that pipeline has to think about, so how do you get the students who are eventually going to have masters in computer science, very computational focused, very math focused, but to do that, we have to really start earlier to create that pipeline. And it's going to take not just the degrees at the end, but it's going to take the pipeline at the beginning. And we're going to have to figure out, institutions like ours, institutions like George Mason that have such scale are going to be so important in that regard, as well as the public schools. So, for instance, one of the things I'm very excited about with the cloud program is we just received an NSF grant with Columbus State Community College, a great innovative community college, to take cloud into the high schools through a Cloud Literacy Institute, summer school. So that's going to be a focus for Nova, and I think the more we can take it earlier, as Ian was saying, and prime the pump and help students be prepared for those opportunities, that's going to benefit. And Amazon HQ2 is going to drive even more of that need.
Yeah, I think we'll be looking for more employers in that local area to partner with us on apprenticeships, guaranteeing jobs, doing internships, and so on. Maria, talk about the work that AWS Educate did in the Philippines. What you or Safa, your colleagues saw there, what convinced the World Bank to do something more in the move to Egypt and then in the future?
Yeah, so Ken, I think one thing that's very interesting in the tech space is usually, when you see a particular region do a big flagship project or something, it's very hard to pick it up and bring it to another region. I mean, the East Asia region and the MENA region are two there's very big differences. And when I talked to the colleague, Shang, who was responsible for, who kind of was leading the charge on the East Asia one, my question was, I was like, what do you need to make this happen in Egypt? Like, if I was going to pick this up and bring it to Egypt, because I think the idea, the scale of it, the exposure of it was just so exciting. I was like, what do you need? And she's like, I need internet. That's it. And I was like, okay. We're talking. Let's think about this. And for us, the biggest appeal was, it's the idea was we get these students, vocational, TVET college students that are enrolled in computer science projects. We get them, we put them in a room for 2 days and we give them training and then introduce them to the program. To me, the biggest benefit that came out of that was that exposure of understanding why this skill would be important. I don't think you can put them in a room for 2 days and have them cloud certified, but I do think that it was something, that exposure, that learning path, that ability to envision where this could take you, that was extremely important. And again, we were dealing, when we talk about diversity, we were dealing with the population, 30% of computer science students came into that room without an email address. They could not register.
Yeah.
They were all on Facebook from their phone numbers, but they didn't have email addresses. So when we talk about digital skills, it's this big black box, and when you start opening it up, there's a lot to it. And I think that to us, it was very interesting to start unpacking some of that and to start giving that exposure and to start creating it. Two things that were extremely interesting to me in that AWS model was also the focus on trained teachers, educators, immensely important. Technology cannot be done without the teachers being a part of that movement. Digital skills cannot be made. And the other was the job fair. And I think that was also extremely interesting for us to see, was the connection of here's your skills, and then here are the opportunities that are right there.
And was that, and to be honest, we're still trying to figure out all of what works and what doesn't out of this. So is the job fair tied to that? Is that just placing a job in front of people and now they see a job and see that opportunity, or is that actually that they have a chance to get that job after, because it's only a few days worth of knowledge.
And so we actually, it was a time crunch, and again, because we were just starting, we actually weren't able to replicate the job fair angle of it, but we do think that it was the idea of introducing the possibilities and the opportunities. And another thing that's very important is, I think, at least the students we interacted with, they expected to go on LinkedIn and see cloud computing expert and then apply to it, but cloud computing, like digital skills, are at the basis of so many other jobs, right? I mean, you see that feed into all these other jobs, and I think their ability to understand that this is about the internet, that this is about data, that this is about security, I think that was really important in terms of understanding why they should be building these skills.
Maintaining that notion of the opportunity is so important. I've seen over my career with community college students, and our students are primarily working students who are older, and a lot of times they're underestimated for their savviness about opportunities. So I have seen programs be started that, you can see this sometimes with like the turbine windmill programs and things, where a lot of interest up front, no jobs, and then they just fall apart. And sometimes I've seen industries that cycle so much. They have a 2-year interest, and then they kind of go away for a few years, and then they come back in 3 years when the things are cycling up. And students have a memory. They have a memory about the fact that, no, that started one time and it's not there. And you'll see if you're trying to restart a program, how difficult that is. So maintaining that opportunity, just having the opportunity to be interviewed and knowing that someone like you received a chance, that will keep the pipeline moving. But if you don't have that, it'll dry up quickly.
Right.
One of the things I'd say, I think I shared this with you when I joined the team several months ago, and I knew about AWS Educate from the external point of view, but to really understand it more internally, it's one of the most inspiring things I've come across in quite some time. And I think one of the things I love about it is that it's such a gorgeous open invitation to so many people. And so today we say anyone with a .edu email address can get on AWS Educate. And you had me thinking real time about maybe needs to be yet even more of an open invitation. I think that's something we can do. But to your point, Scott, the piece that I think we collectively want to continue to push on is what is the outcome?
Yeah.
At Amazon, one of the things we say is we just don't like best intentions, right? Good intentions are not something that we feel really good about. We think about outcomes. And I think there's something to keep students and other interested talent motivated through the process, to keep them hungry to acquire the new talent and stay on top of it, may have to do with what is the expected outcome of the process. And I think we have some opportunity there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, again, like we always say, we're day one at this stuff, but I think, in the essence, we want to place people into jobs. We want to give them that true capital. And by the way, it's these guys that are doing the cool stuff.
But I mean,
we're
don't
just
sell yourself
placing a
short. I mean,
platform.
the thing that's allowed us to move fast has been educate.
Exactly.
Because, we would not have been able to do what we've been able to do had there not been that content that was already there. So, the predisposition to work with an institution like ours, to work with us, but to have that support for content allowed us to move fast in a way that wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
Right. To take attention off of that, talk to me about so there were some really cool photos of some of the girls and women at the Cairo event. Tell me about that. Tell me about the impact. I'm also interested, what motivated them, and why are they not coming to other, whatever, societal stuff that's stopping them from being as deeply involved in technology jobs?
I mean, Ken, to me it was a surprise. I remember I showed up. I mean, it was right around. So it's a Muslim country, and it was right on the Monday after. So it was like today. It was like the Monday after Thanksgiving, right? And I mean, it was just like so it was Eid, and it was the Monday after Eid, and we just did not expect. I mean, with students, having the kind of, we didn't have enough time. We just did not expect a turnout. So the event was supposed to start at 9 a.m. and I showed up at the hall at 7 a.m. just to make sure things were good, and there were lines, and there were lines of girls with parents, and these parents were asking me how they can sit in the hotel lobby while their girls were going to sit in this hall and attend this training, and so they're trying to deal with their cultural, they don't want to just let them off. They're worried about security. They're worried about them sitting on the same table with other boys. They're worried about all of that, but then they see the opportunity. And I think because this was, our targeting was to low-income areas around Cairo. So it was definitely the underserved. And I think that word, I mean, the flip side of the coin is the hunger. And the hunger that we saw in that room, and the amount of people actually that came up to, we were so blessed that your team, you were able to mobilize Arabic-speaking trainers, which to me was a huge opportunity, because it's very interesting, because their browsers was able to translate everything on the internet into Arabic, but the fact that we could communicate with them in Arabic was immensely important. And we had girls walking up to the trainers saying, "What do I do to get a job at AWS?" Yeah. And that kind of ambition is what was really, really inspiring.
That's awesome.
Right?
If there's one thing like that I've learned over this journey, one, there is a power of the brand, right? And so with Amazon and AWS, there's a responsibility, I think, that we have, given this great growth, to act as an attractor. But the other thing is, we constantly, I think this is one endemic problem of education, is it's constantly saying low expectations, and it's not saying out that great opportunity. When you throw these great opportunities in front of women and girls in Cairo and community colleges and non-traditional perspective, you're going to win. I just think we need to start exploiting that more often.
Yeah.
I think we do, and just to add on that real quick, often in different organizations, people talk about the term D&I, which stands for diversity and inclusion, and I think for us, even internally, we're flipping it to say it's inclusion and diversity, because I think inclusion is the thing that begets sort of the flywheel of how we can really come together in different ways. And to me, the essence of inclusion isn't rejecting the ideas that are different than yours. It's about being curious about them. Yeah. And so what I love as I hear your story was about embracing some of the things about that culture and finding a way to make it work, as opposed to coming in and try to change it, right? I love how that works. And I do think that is probably one of the greatest opportunity that I think the cloud can offer, but also companies like AWS and so many of the other companies that are in the industry to really come together in a new way.
Fantastic. All right, before I turn it back to the crowd, because I want to leave some room for questions, and I love these topics. Quick think big section. starting with Ian. As an employer, what employment practices for all of us, Amazon, customers, partners, people who are coming to reInvent, really need to evolve, in order to make way for the pipelines that Scott and Mariam are talking about?
A lot. I think when you look at employment today, the way that any one of us end up working with an organization in any kind, so much of employment practices really around the world were defined in the Industrial Revolution. In the United States or most of the developed Western world, like literally the Industrial Revolution of the late 19th century, early 20th century, some of the early labor movement, some of those practices of manufacturing environments created so many of the practices that continue to define the employment relationship that I might have with my employer. It just seems kind of crazy, right? Because we're not in the Industrial Revolution anymore. We're maybe 2, maybe 3 generations beyond that era, but so many of the employment practices are just stuck there. And I think someone's going to have to step forward and try to come up with a new way for individuals to get together to do work that aren't defined by something that happened over 100 years ago. And one of my favorite things is, we did some work where you go into a higher education learning institution and you find out that faculty are putting together young learners into cohorts. And in one institution in particular, they took 5 students, put them in a cohort their sophomore year of a 4-year program, and these students worked together in a cohort through their sophomore, through their junior, through their senior year.
Yeah.
These individuals had learned the thing that we care most about at work, which is how do you work together as a team.
Yeah.
But what I had to do as an employer is I had to go in and rip that apart because I had to hire individual humans. I couldn't hire a team. But there's so many things like that where I think even the humans have changed the way that they work and the way they communicate, and yet they're all stuck in this old traditional employment paradigms that again, from a bygone era.
That's awesome. Love that, and we probably quote you on that one. How do we, Mariam, how do we change the game in developing countries, and what's AWS's role?
I think, Ken, the fact that we're even talking about the developing country today, the fact that this panel even includes that perspective is so important, because I think being able to acknowledge that opportunity and being able to also recognize it as a huge loss if we're not able to move now. So at the World Bank, we always say it's like the elephant. It doesn't move, but when it moves, it shakes. So I think we're ready to shake, and we're ready to shake with bigger players. Amazon, the World Bank, these are big names, and the bank's strategy now is build, broker, boost, right? So we want to broker those partnerships. We want to bring that learning exchange. We want to bring that ability to say, the global educate, all you need is an email address. There is nothing that's stopping a person who's sitting in Cairo or Saudi from being able to benefit from these, and I think that being able to bring that language, bring that context, into the content that we create is so important, because then we're just losing out on such a huge fraction of people. So I think when you say think big, there's the 3 Bs of the bank, and I think that's the 4th B, and saying is build, broker, boost, but do it in a big way.
Yeah. All right. And Scott, lastly, be a futurist. Give me your view on higher ed, on K-12. How does education change, sort itself out? How do we put this work on steroids?
Well, I think we need, one thing I would say is we need more inter-institutional stackability is a phrase, or connectivity. So in other words, rather than just having a community college start a cloud degree, we need to make sure that cloud degree can be started in high school and driven down there to prompt that interest. We need to make sure that if you come into an apprenticeship program and as a veteran, you can carry credit into that degree. We need to make sure that if you then are employed, you can keep moving forward. Once you finish that 2-year degree, can you carry it forward to a 4-year institution and get that 4-year degree? And can you keep moving forward? And that requires a lot of, institutional operability, the kind of things that technology sector has been able to do, but academia is still struggling with.
Gotcha. All right, some great thoughts from the panel. Would love to turn it over to you guys. We've got about 9 minutes left, and want to see if you guys have any questions you'd like to you'd like to throw to the panelists' way. Yes?
Hi, Mike Somerville with the University of San Diego. And so I work in IT, and my guys, we run the systems, right? You can't work in higher ed without wanting to teach. And so what's been frustrating me is that we're graduating computer science students that don't have an AWS account. That should be illegal.
We agree.
Check.
To the help I need from AWS. So I signed this up for Academy, and I got certified, and now I'm trying to present that to the professors, and they don't know what the hell it is. And then I tried to use AWS Educate, and that's a separate team that has a separate learning management system, and it's almost like they're trying to compete for Amazon-ness, which is frustrating because I'm going to stand in front of the students and say, okay, here's your AWS Educate stuff, but it's a temporary account, so that when you graduate, you're going to have to do this all over again, and you can't take the stuff with you. So anyway, I'm not going to go into a big litany of how awesome you are and how much I want you to help extend it, but I would really love to hear how you think I can get in front of the professors and convince them that the guy from IT has something that they really need to teach our students, because I need to hire them.
Yeah. So sometimes we gotta get out of our own way. Like I say, this is, there was a principle that started in Amazon. Actually, it kind of got blended into, I think, Learn and Be Curious, which is vocally self-critical. So I will be vocally self-critical on this stage and say, there's things that we have to get out of our way. We should be meshing those learning management systems together. Right now, so I'm not gonna say which one we have, but we need to be doing that. We need to make it easier. We need to be out in front of your teachers, providing that professional development instruction with no obstacles. And we are talking with, so we definitely partner in depth with the Academy team, but we've got to partner better so that it's a streamlined path. What I can say to you, my email address is, Ken Eisner without the R at Amazon.com. That's what happens when your boss is on vacation when you get hired. But shoot me a note, and we'll make sure that we get the right things set up. We got so much going on in California right now. We want to make sure that we get it right.
But we see Amazon and AWS kind of doing that to a certain, because we work with the Academy mostly on the apprenticeship program. Right. And Educate mostly on the degree area. And over the years, you've kind of come together in that regard. Academy's been focused on certifications and hiring. Educate more on the education pipeline, and I think you've kind of brought that together.
And we want to blend in, access to certifications inside the curriculum, so it's a natural progression. But yes, we are improving. We need to get better, and we're going to address your need. Others, Mr. Frazier.
Thinking about higher ed and sort of where we go in sort of some of these big changes, we think, kind of your thoughts on, is this about sort of improving the kind of pipeline step that we have, like you talked about, in terms of teaching people less about skills and more about sort of how to learn, that their lifetime is about, looking at particular kind of R1 type of, higher things, kind of like how to scale sort of the education that's there, or is it to look more at that, I heard talk about the 60-year curriculum that's there, kind of, where do you think kind of the energy is best focused there in terms of how to evolve higher ed?
Scott, you got to lead this one.
Well, I do think there's this challenging balance that we run with that is, for us, we have to think about the practical side of it, but because that's how our students are going to get employed. But on the other side, we don't want to just make degrees that are just teaching tools piled up against each other. So, I think it's, there's got to be ways we can use these practical areas in a way that teaches the underlying principles better. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about that. I think that's the challenges we've run into with math oftentimes. We still teach math in a very theoretical, calculus approach that pulls students away, but we can still pick up the right math skills and be more math focused with a practicality tied to it. And I think that's where we've got to get to. I do think, too, when we're talking about innovations, we have to think about innovations at scale. Innovating at a boutique level and lots of resources is really easy. Innovating at scale is very difficult.
And just the one thing you said, the idea of managing the 60-year curriculum, I think it's an interesting idea, but I think the reality is that the world's moving faster, the rate of change is moving faster, and I think technology is only going to make it more so. And so I think the idea of just trying to think about something over such a long horizon is really challenging to even think about conceptually what that would be. I don't even know if I could put any money on, because we're in Vegas, put any money on
You can put money on anything.
a 10-year curriculum, right? Just because things are moving so incredibly
But
fast.
in that regard, it's not so much about what is the curriculum, it's about the organization to allow for
Platform
that
for
to
it.
happen. And I think that's where institutions have to think a little differently.
Yeah, I see. HBS, Harvard have such a important potential role. Not the brand, the pedagogy, the experience, and so on. If that contribution back into sort of a semi-OER type movement, I think can be really powerful and also help create that vision of Scott's continuous
An open systems
student.
OER movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My name's Atisha Alford. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, with a technical community college. One of the questions I have is, oftentimes you might see silos existing between continuing education as well as curriculum in terms of trying to create that pipeline to fill employer needs. How could we actually bridge that gap between continuing education and curriculum in order to meet that pipeline?
Yeah, when you say continuing education and curriculum in non-academic, what you mean is degree programs and non-degree. And I think that's where, I'll tell you what we did, is we kind of blew that up. And so we have a VP of workforce, and we said, your role is not just to go out and sell stuff, it's to kind of focus on that whole workforce engagement. And he sits right across from our provost for IT and engineering tech, and in between them are our data analysts. And so it's trying to break apart those silos. And I think that's what you have to do. But I do think is thinking differently about continuing education, because whether you're at Harvard Business School or Wake Tech, a lot of times that's a whole forgotten part of the institution. And that's where I think the real missing piece is for this kind of 60-year curriculum that you're talking
Scott,
about.
wouldn't you say sort of in that next future vision of education, isn't this all modular, where that it's all one long pathway with lots of branches that you can come in and out of?
It's the interesting part of community colleges too, because we've often had this continuing education. So when you look at our IT, like our cyber program, our biotech, our healthcare programs, we have so many students that already have 4-year degrees, and it's not that their 4-year degree is meaningless. They need that degree to progress, to get their job, but they need a set of skills to get their foot in the door, and so they come to us as almost like a finishing school. And too much within the academic world, we think about, well, you go to this institution or that institution, and then when you're through, you're finished. And that's just not the way it works.
Gotcha. All right, so I know the guy with the rope's going to pull me off in a sec. But I thank you all for coming to this session. Have a wonderful reInvent. We'll be around for a few minutes to take questions. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you.